Before the rising, there were several events impacting on the hospital and ironically preparing the staff for the events they would see in Easter week. One of these was World War I. Many of the doctors and a good number of the nurses served in casualty clearing stations and field hospitals in France, Flanders and further beyond. People such as Victor McAllister, who was a student here before the war, served as a medical officer with the Seaforth Islanders in France and returned to the staff in 1918 and ironically was helping treat the wounded of the War of Independence in 1921. Alec Blaney, who you'll hear more about in the events of 1916, actually served as a surgeon in the Dublin Field Hospital near Boulogne for 3 months in 1918. Our nursing staff also joined up. Josephine Burke joined up just before Christmas 1914 and served in hospitals in France. Mary McGivney, who was matron at the time, signed her off as being fit for military service, as did one of the hospital doctors, Edward O'Keefe. Mary McGivney went on to be decorated by the King for her services to the war effort. Other nurses, such as Anastasia Lawrence, also, who was originally from Carrick-on-Suir, also served on the front. Before the rising, the hospital had seen some violent injuries, either from the 1913 lockout or the victims of the Bachelor's Walk shooting that followed the Howth gun running. During the war, the hospital was seeing hospital ships come in. Approximately one ship docked in Dublin every month, and the Mater Hospital, along with the other hospitals in Dublin, were seeing up to a ward full of injured soldiers. This is a postcard sent home by one of the Australian soldiers to his mother, telling her where he was and that he was doing well. Another injured soldier is Alec Campbell, who came in here in 1915 suffering from a gunshot wound to the skull. Another soldier came in was Edwin Morban, an Aboriginal soldier from Australia who came in with shell shock. There were quite a number of shell shock wounded. Another Australian was George Loy, who was wounded in the kidney in France. Many of the soldiers who left here initially went to convalescent home and eventually had to go back to face the horrors of the trenches. They also were treated in their own hospitals. This is an X-ray of a Canadian soldier who was treated here for a fractured ankle as a result of a gunshot wound. He was eventually repatriated to a Canadian hospital where this X-ray was taken. Just before the rising, the volunteers were getting used to their guns. During one such event, Thomas Clark, one of the signatories of the rising, was shot and wounded in the arm. His wife Kathleen brought him to the Mater Hospital, where he was operated on by Dr. Finnan. He was suffering from a bullet wound to the arm and a fracture of the radius. The bullet was removed and he was sent home. At that time, Tom Clark was under observation from the Dublin Metropolitan Police as one of the known extremists in the Irish movement. The week he was in the hospital, they have no record of his whereabouts. Clearly he was smuggled in and out of the hospital. The next time they pick him up is 2 days after his discharge, when they find him, his arm in a sling, walking from his house on Richmond Avenue back to the hospital. During the week of 1916, the hospital took 25 dead and 50 wounded in during the week. The first half of the week, most of the casualties came from the Cabra Bridge, North Circular Road, Doyle's Corner area. The rebels had thrown barriers across the road there to stop reinforcements coming through Broadstone railway station. On the Tuesday of that week, British artillery, which was stationed at Broadstone and also at the North Dublin Union at Grangegorman, shelled their positions at North Circular Road, and they're forced to abandon it, either to move to the GPO or to move out to Finglas, where Thomas Ashe was. In the second half of the week, the casualties were coming from the eastern side of O'Connell Street, outside of the Cordon, Marlborough Street area, what's now Sean McDermott Street and Mountjoy Square, where there's no record of major combat in the area. The Dublin Fire Brigade ambulance picked up 11 casualties in that area on Saturday alone to bring them to the hospital. We also have come across statements of people who were in the hospital at the time. This is one from the Secretary to the Catholic Archbishop of Dublin, Monsignor Curran, who describes that there were soldiers lying on the pavement outside Mountjoy Prison, sniping at rebels in houses on Eccles Street. And another more dramatic newspaper article from the time where it was reported that 2 rebel snipers who were hiding in ivy in Eccles Lane. Eccles Lane at the time ran off Eccles Street, went behind what's now the Diabetic Day Centre and now towards Dorset Street. The 2 snipers there were killed by soldiers from houses in Eccles Street.